6, and 3. And tonight's big game jackpot is estimated at over $60 million. See you later.
The Live Cam 5 Network, only on News Center 5.
New England has 4 seasons, each one precise and measured. Each one shaped the architecture of this prideful place. And each season presents a round of violent weather, storms that have broken the will of farmers and fishermen, ruined merchants and politicians, torn apart families and places they love the most. At Century's End, we are no closer to mastering the storm furies of the 20th century than we were of the 19th century. The evidence is plain to see. These are the New England storms of the century.
The New England Century Project is a special presentation of WCVB TV. Tonight, New England Storms of the Century. A journey through time and weather and the New England experience. Meteorologist Dick Albert is your host.
In September of 1938, New Englanders were still drowsing in the last days of summer, unaware that the doors were closing shut on an epoch. The meanest days of the Depression were over. Recovery seemed sure, and New England was ready for the turn of autumn leaves. Fall tourists once again drove the back roads. But the houses are mainly old, and generations of ordinary men are celebrated for living and being useful. In New England, the past is never out of date. In cities and towns, in 1938, the pace of life and business was much slower, and you listened to radio for entertainment more than news.
Columbia offers swing.
The pleasures were simple. There was talk about the movies, and there was talk about the Saturday dance. On Sunday, September 18th, the New York Yankees clinched another pennant, more than a dozen games ahead of the Boston Red Sox. And it rained. It rained Sunday and Monday, Tuesday, and that fateful Wednesday. On Monday, far to the south, newspapers reported a major hurricane was only 24 hours away from the South Florida coast. But on Tuesday morning, it was reported with great relief that the storm had veered north, heading out to sea. The National Weather Bureau received congratulations from the New York Times for tracking the storm so well. Weather forecasters didn't have much help in those days. Tropical storms were noted in a casual way by ships at sea. But no satellites, no radar, not even storm hunter airplanes were there to plot the path of hurricanes. Aviation was young and timid. Pilots avoided heavy weather.
Plane from New York and the east, arriving 4:20 on time.
Insiders knew the U.S. Weather Bureau was a deeply flawed organization. Some weathermen were careless or reckless. Some lacked basic skills, not knowing how to relate wind velocities and barometric readings to reckon the speed of oncoming storms. And all of them relied on instruments developed in centuries past: thermometers, barometers, and weather vanes. It was a prescription for disaster, and a monumental disaster was on its way.
Northeast storm warnings.
Wednesday broke with a patch of sun here and there, but cloud cover returned. The air was heavy, stifling. Some had a foreboding. The day felt wrong. Overnight, the hurricane was off Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. The Weather Bureau assumed it would continue out to sea, but the storm turned inland, found a narrow passage, and hammered due north. Amazingly, within 6 hours, the 38 hurricane was here.
Where they went wrong was not anticipating the acceleration of the storm. Speeds of 15 to 25 or 30 miles an hour are generally about all you would expect. So for the storm to actually accelerate to nearly 60 miles an hour forward speed was most unusual and simply caught all the forecasters totally off guard.
Once again, we bring you the romance of Helen Trent.
The U.S. Weather Bureau failed to warn an unsuspecting public. Long Island and New England were unaware the hurricane of the century was bearing down on them. If anything, New Englanders that morning were more concerned about the events in Munich, Germany, and the very real threat of another world war. In Boston, the Braves take the field to play the St. Louis Cardinals. The winds are rising. The late legendary sports writer of the Boston Globe, Harold Casa, told this story.
The hurricane hit Boston while the Bees were playing the Cardinals. As the winds increased, Beans Reardon, umpire behind the plate, said, "When the advertising signs go down, I'll call it." But he called the game when Tony Cuccinello yelled for a pop fly behind second base, only to have catcher Al Lopez wind up catching the wind-blown ball almost against the backstop. If he had waited, Reardon would have seen the advertising signs get carried away by the wind, and he'd have gone with them.
In mid-afternoon, in one wild smash after another, the hurricane of '38 battered, unprepared, unaware New England.
There was a word out that there was a storm, but when that high water came and those winds came, it was something that most people on the east end of Long Island hadn't seen. That's why so many people lost their lives.
Huge tossing waves became a 30-foot cliff of stony gray seawater. The storm surge overwhelmed coastal communities in Rhode Island. A virtual tidal wave roared into downtown Providence. Floodwaters were marked at more than 13 feet. People were trapped in their cars and had to swim to safety, and some didn't make it. Live wires were everywhere.
The wind came around the corner of my house so fast it blew down a tree against the prevailing wind, which is amazing to see a tree blowing the wrong way coming down.
Gusting winds drove the sea on and on. Salt killed vegetation 20 miles inland. Salt spray was found 50 miles inland. Many adventurers down to the sea for the excitement were swept away and drowned.
We had a lot of instruments up here. Only one survived, the others were damaged. And the one that survived gave us more than 3 miles of wind in 1 minute. Now, a mile a minute is 60 miles an hour, so 3 miles a minute is 180 miles an hour. And the average for that minute was 186 miles an hour, and the peak gusts took up to 200 and something. It was unbelievable because it looked like the end of the world.
People had not experienced anything of this magnitude, and so there was very little in the way of warning the population at large about the dangers of a hurricane. And certainly there is more danger from a hurricane than simply the wind, and the southern New England coast was open to a battering that it had never seen before.
And the hurricane winds blew. People were killed by falling trees, by falling walls and chimneys, by flying boards and splinters. 685 lives were lost in the 1938 hurricane. 275 million trees broken or uprooted. Thousands of buildings damaged. Frowsy cottages from Narragansett Bay to the Cape burst into flinders. Nearly 7,000 of these summer homes destroyed. There was flooding from Onset Bay sweeping down across the length of Long Island. More than 2,000 boats gone. Power would be out for many long, anxious days and nights. The night held more terror, a pitch-black stillness. Out there, everything had been changed. Nothing was the same. Fallen trees, washed out roads and blocked railroads. Live wires were draped everywhere. More than 26,000 automobiles had been destroyed. Travel was impossible. Beyond all the devastation, the desolate survivors had one single question that would not be answered for days. Who's dead and who's alive?
We're up atop the Blue Hill Observatory where the strongest winds recorded in the '38 hurricane right here, 186 miles per hour. You know, to me, there were 3 reasons that hurricane was the most devastating this century. The first reason is that nobody knew it was coming. The second is that Bermuda High brings us the hot and humid weather in the summer. This time, it steered the hurricane across the Atlantic and up the East Coast. The third reason is the jet stream. It took it up the East Coast from the Carolinas to New England in less than 6 hours. That's incredible.
Another September day, and another big hurricane was approaching. The Great Atlantic Hurricane of 1944 struck southeastern Massachusetts with full force just before midnight. Winds quickly reached 100 miles an hour, and the rain fell in blinding sheets. Severe destruction of homes, property, and utilities was widespread, especially along Cape Cod. At 1 in the morning, Chatham reported winds of 105 miles per hour. In the gray-green hour just before dawn, it did look like a battlefield. Surprisingly, this nighttime hurricane would take only 31 lives. The lessons learned in 1938 and 1944 should have been helpful in 1954, August 31st, 1954, but the United States Weather Bureau could manage only a 2-hour warning before Hurricane Carol ripped into New England. 50 lives were lost. Hurricane Carol brought 100-mile-per-hour winds and another flood surge through Providence, Rhode Island, a near-record tide of seawater. The eye of the hurricane crossed Long Island, through Connecticut, west of Worcester, and into New Hampshire.
I left home and went to the shore where I saw waves 40 to 50 feet high racing in off the open ocean, spray going 150 feet into the air, watching small boats being pummeled to splinters.
And I turned on the radio, and at that point they had just realized we were going to have a hurricane in about 2 or 3 hours. It was not a lot of notice again. And so I got all excited. I got people up in the house and went out on the porch, and you could literally watch the ocean rise. I've never seen it before or after.
Hurricanes since Carol have done property damage and taken lives in the Northeast, but we were spared the excess of Hurricane Andrew or Hugo, or the other storms that brutalized the southern tier of the United States.
We're no-go for launch at this time. Just because of weather? Because of weather.
Diane, Donna, Gloria, and Bob were unwelcome visitors, but passed quickly. We took their temperatures, measured their speeds, and calculated their courses. You see, this is the only thing you can do with a hurricane. Watch it, get ready for it, and survive. The world spins another turn. The sky is washed clean, and life goes on. We are left to clean up the mess and consider how truly helpless we are before nature's fury.
More on the New England storms of the century when we return.
New England Storms of the Century is brought to you by your New England Jeep dealers.
This is Steve. This is because while most sport utilities are climbing higher and higher in price, now you can lease a Jeep Cherokee for $0 down, $259 a month, and $754 due at signing. Plus, Cherokee comes with air conditioning, power windows and locks, and remote keyless entry, all at no extra charge. So let Cherokee take you to the top of the steepest mountain with a lease that's surprisingly down to earth. Check one out at your New England Jeep dealer.
There used to be one way to bank. Now there's the Fleet One way. The Fleet One Gold account connects all your accounts, so it's easy to move money around or put it away for the future. You can bank by ATM, phone, or the web, even pay bills online. And it all shows up on one statement. The Fleet One Gold account. One easy way into all Fleet has to offer. Fleet, we're ready when you are.
Excuse me, I'm looking for something funny.
Oh, well, you've come to the right place. Behold the power of our virtual store.
Scott Adams? Wow. You got anything funny?
Funny? How about this? I worked for a huge soulless corporation that sucked the life force out of my body, turned me into a bitter and cynical shell of a man.
But a funny shell of a man.
BarnesandNoble.com. If we don't have your book, nobody does.
Sorry I'm late. Stanley?
Excuse me, sir. Your seat.
The Integra from Acura. Go places.
On June 9th, 1953, dark and ominous clouds were building to the west. As a matter of fact, 40 or 50 miles from the Blue Hill Observatory, Worcester was being ravaged by tornadic winds. It never reached this far east, but it certainly left its calling card.
The 50s now seem so simple and so long ago. Maybe our vision, maybe our values have blurred the gentle themes and romantic yearnings of that silent generation. It was a decade of Ike and Korea and a Marine pilot who knew how to hit a target. It was a decade of Joe McCarthy and Lawrence Welk.
And remember, you're all invited.
And Howdy Doody. But for that 50s generation in New England, there will always be one preeminent event to be remembered, one signature weather catastrophe of its time. In the western towns of Massachusetts, and that still means any settlement beyond Framingham, in the fields and farms, in the high heat of summer, change comes slowly or not at all. To sweltering citizens in Petersham and Holden and Worcester, it felt like a scorching day in August. Temperatures were predicted in the 90s. The day was June 9th, 1953. At 4:30 that afternoon, relief from the oppressive heat was on its way. Clouds were gathering. A thunderstorm and cooling rain couldn't be far off. Near the Quabbin Reservoir, the first funnel cloud was spotted. In 84 minutes, from Petersham through Worcester to Southborough, a stretch of 42 miles, a tornado ripped apart homes, buildings, barns, and snatched the lives of 94 people.
The wind got to be so strong, then it began to get dark. And I could see the clouds look so different from anything that I had ever seen before. So I made the kids go in the house, and the door wouldn't stay closed. The first thing that I saw when I went in was the curtains in the kitchen out straight. And then the next thing, there was no window. Then there was no wall. And then I was outside. That's all. And the noise was so intense that when it was all over, you felt like you were deaf. It was a terrible noise, and the smell, had a definite smell. And the color of the air, and looking around, it had a funny pinkish, bluish, kind of a funny, and I'll never forget that, mostly the smell. And the house was gone. It was just gone, nothing. It happened so fast, we didn't realize that it was a tornado. My girls thought it was an atomic bomb had been dropped. So the next thing was, well, what are we going to do now? My father had gone to the store to get some bread. And when he came back, the house was gone. My husband, of course, called me, and he called my mother, who lived upstairs. He called his mother, who lived in the neighborhood, and she was killed. His father was killed.
In the tornado track, houses were left a jumble of bricks and mortar, timber and broken crockery. More than 2,000 homes were obliterated.
And after it was all over, you saw cars that were tipped over and rolled around, and trees pulled out by the roots. No, they weren't pulled out by the roots. They were broken off. And, you know, when I looked, after it was all over, and looked down at Great Brook Valley, there were no roofs on the tops of the buildings. There was sheets and rags and stuff hanging out of the windows. There was no sound from anybody. Everybody was just shocked, I guess.
Miriam D'Agostino collected her family and sought shelter. The horror of the day caught in their faces by a photographer from the Worcester Telegram and Gazette.
You'll notice they were all looking at the ground because there was wires. And all I could see was tell them to be careful not to step on any wires.
The tornado struck Assumption College. 2 nuns and a priest were killed. The tornado leaped over that ridge and touched down here in the Great Brook Valley.
A row of houses on the even-numbered side of the street destroyed, and every other house on the odd side left standing, for instance.
History professor John O'Toole has collected eyewitness accounts of the tornado tragedy.
The tornado was effectively hidden from the radar of that day. All it was showing a rainstorm.
More than 1,000 people were injured by the twister. The tornado event was virtually unreported for 2 hours. Few could believe a tornado of that magnitude was actually spawned here in New England.
The furthest debris that I know of from Shrewsbury landed in the water off Chatham. A wedding photo. It had been carried for 120 miles in the air. Amazing.
As I had a letter come, an airmail letter was blown out of somebody's writing desk, an airmail envelope, and it was from Fayal Street, Worcester, and it landed in my yard in Hingham.
335-mile-an-hour wind. That's well, triple the velocity of a substantial hurricane. And it's just amazing. And moving forward as quickly as it did, just taking almost everything in its path.
New England has several tornadoes a year. Most of these are minor cyclonic events and rarely attract much attention. Great Barrington, at the very limit of the Commonwealth, suffered through a tornado in May of 1995. But these are usually minor episodes and cause no great amount of casualties. Weather observers report the deadliest tornadoes are considered more of a 25 to 30-year event. For those who remember that June day in Worcester, any tornado should be classified a deadly event.
Start something.
Picture a mid-sized performance sedan, so sophisticated, it's as adept at handling finances as it is the road. Right now, lease Intrigue for just $299 a month with 0 down payment, 0 first month's payment, and 0 due at signing. Tax, title, license, and registration are extra. Hurry! Offer ends March 31st. Start something. At your Oldsmobile dealer now.
The promise of the internet is not in the future. It's now. The bandwidth to change everything. Ride the light.
Help me understand this. You live here. You work here, you shop here, and where does your daily newspaper come from? Here, right? Filled with stories about here, and down here, and this place. Hello? What if there were a world-class daily newspaper that came from right here? Written by people who live here, talking about all the stuff that's important right here. Schools, businesses, listings, huh? That's what I thought. The new Metro West Daily News. You'll only find it here.
Naked, it's a great Bruegger's bagel. Dressed up, it's lunch. Now how you dress it is up to you. Because you know, when you're building on a better bagel, there's nowhere to go but up. Come on into Bruegger's. I'll make you lunch. Bruegger's Bagel Bakers bake a better bagel.
Ice. Ice in silvery spray. Ice in peaks. Islands of ice and ice in crystals. Of all the rigors of winter, ice storms may be the most beautiful and solemn to see, but the hardest to cope with. On roads, on steps, on sidewalks, or anywhere a man has to stand on his own 2 feet. Motorists play a risky game on ice. A glassy gallop and a dangerous kind of bumper pool. Scuttle out of the way if you can. New England is good for an ice storm or two every winter. John Cole is the co-owner, editor, and founder of the Maine Times. He's a Yale scholar, a veteran of the air war over Europe, and a former commercial fisherman. And he's written about the weather at all the newspapers he's worked.
See, these birds, they come right into the feeder because they're upset because they know a bad storm is coming. With today's weather observers, now they can take you every step of the way. You could turn on your television set or listen to the radio, but they didn't tell us the ice storm was coming last year. And that just came out of nowhere.
In January of 1998, an icy tempest whistled into Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. The northern counties became one big ice sculpture. It was the ice storm of the New England century.
Remember the old joke, you can't get there from here? Well, a lot of places in central Maine today, that's exactly the way it is. And the chances are when you do get where you're going, there won't be any power. The ice is bringing down trees tearing down lines, and the lines breaking off poles. What's left is a tangled, twisted, sometimes flaming mess. Behind these urgent operations, the cleanup, picking up the pieces of millions of topless trees. One resident said the other night the woods out back were so loud, it sounded like there must have been dinosaurs thrashing around out there.
Thick ice encrusted trees. Gradually the balance was tipped, and there followed a percussive din echoing on the frosty air. Thousands upon thousands of trees across Maine and New Hampshire and deep into Canada broke under the icy weight.
This is devastation. This is looking up here, 10 poles in a row. I've never seen 10 poles in a row down in the street.
Power lines took a severe beating. More than 600,000 people in Maine were without power in the aftermath of the storm.
That ice storm was probably the worst. Everything is covered. The wire that was down is frozen in the ground. A lot of it you can't get back up. You have to just replace it, run new wire.
Another 56,000 people in New Hampshire were left without heat or water. Utility companies did their best, but spokesmen admitted it would take weeks to completely restore power.
I believe there were 9 steel towers, and they had just crushed under the weight. They didn't break or fall over, they just went crushed. They crushed under the weight.
Panic buying swept through Maine and New Hampshire. Generators were lusted after like a new Mercedes.
They were selling generators for, 3 and 4 times what they were worth. There must be just hundreds of thousands of generators sitting around in southern Maine now, not doing anything.
Limbs were falling while guys were working, and they'd come crashing down right beside you, limbs and trees. The ice just kept destroying things.
Utility crews are taken for granted by most, but this is dangerous work. This line crew from New Hampshire Public Service remembers the great ice storm with no particular fondness. There are wrong times for everything, and swinging on a pole in an icy wind is one of those wrong times.
When you're climbing poles, something that we don't do a lot, but in storm conditions we more or less have to do a lot of it, you become a sail on the pole. So you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. You're a sail, the wind hits you, and there goes the pole, and the pole's going back and forth. It's something that you really have to get used to.
Ice has an undeniable beauty. The shifting moods and colors of the city, the hard white silence of the outlands are caught in ice like frozen music. But of all the perilous storms in nature's bag, the ice storm may be the most treacherous.
The ice storm of '98 in Maine is one that we who experienced it will all remember for the rest of our lives. It was what I could truly call a terrifying experience. The sounds of the ice breaking as the wind rocked the trees and snapped the branches was something I've never heard before and don't even know how to put into words. It was nothing like anything I can describe.
More on the New England storms of the century when we return.
Get into my car. Get into your Mazda dealer's Spring Breakthrough Sales event. For breakthrough savings on every new Mazda, like the all-new Mazda Protege with CD player and air for just $13,995. Plus, choose incredibly low 0.9% to 3.9% APR financing. Hurry into the Mazda Spring Breakthrough Sales event today.
Once they roamed the seas and explored the skies, but today they're on the net. They are pioneers discovering a new world of internet applications, and that's where Vario.com comes in. For we are the pioneers of the internet, and now Vario brings you North Point DSL, dedicated high-performance internet access starting at $123 a month. Vario, the new world of business.
Now that was interesting.
Sometimes it all just comes together, comfortably.
We are not happy about this. You go, girl. We weren't happy about baking all day either.
But it was ours.
New stovetop oven classics.
A one-dish oven-baked chicken dinner.
Sauce, seasoned stuffing.
All you add is chicken.
5 minutes to make.
30 to bake.
A Sunday taste.
Tuesday effort.
Dagnabbit, what's next? Thanksgiving in a box?
New stovetop oven classics. Sunday taste, Tuesday effort.
We need a martini.
Over the years, we've packed Dodge Caravan with lots of innovative features, while Caravan owners have packed it with everything else. As a result, it's risen to lofty heights as America's best-selling minivan and a Consumer's Digest Best Buy 10 years running. So to stay on top, we're offering this feature-packed Caravan for just $17,585, which makes it America's lowest-priced minivan. Climb aboard Dodge Caravan. We think you'll like it up here. See the friendly Dodge dealer near you.
The tourists are gone. This is the hard season, stony and bone white, silent, narrow days, trying to keep the pipes warm till spring. New England lives under the iron rule of its weather, never more so than in the first 3 months of the year. Head-cracking cold winds, slick ice, and treacherous footing. A few flakes of snow, that's not so bad. 5 or 6 inches make a mess, but hardy New Englanders plow on with only minor discomfort. But no winter passes without one major snow event. The elements conspire and Alberta clippers match up with freezing rain and thick, heavy snow. And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does.
This is the National Weather Service of Boston. Heavy snow warnings for Massachusetts this afternoon and tonight.
A blizzard.
An accumulation of 8 to 16 inches will fall before the storm abates.
A whiteout. Blizzards obscure all the familiar landmarks. Highways and bridges and other cars vanish, and your vision is just beyond the hood of your car. And you don't know if you're traveling north or south. And when it's finally over, it may take days to dig out. There are monumental blizzards to remember from the 20th century.
It is one for the record books.
Boston digs out from the third largest storm in this city's history. It'll take at least 24 hours to recover from the wrath of this April Fool's Day blizzard.
Unless you have real emergency business, don't come on downtown. Don't leave your home.
It doesn't happen that often. Hopefully it won't happen for the next 50 years.
A real sweetheart of a nor'easter landed on St. Valentine's Day in Boston. The year was 1940.
Boston snowbound. For the first time this winter, the hub is paralyzed by a blizzard, transformed into a city of buried autos and blocked streets.
New England is famous for quirky weather patterns, atmospheric trickery that has produced some historic weather embrangles. Our big problem is a mysterious party called the New England Cutoff. No, not that cutoff. No, not that cutoff either. This cutoff.
But every once in a while we get that famous giant cutoff low. What is that? A massive vortex of spinning air that's isolated, cut off from the jet stream. And underneath this vortex, storms stall. And that's how we get our blizzards and nor'easters.
February 6th, 1978, early Monday morning. The Boston commute is no more of a hassle than it usually is, even though meteorologists had called for heavy snow, more than 8 inches.
Thing is, there's a big upper air low dropping down right behind it, and all of the computer indications are that there's going to be a monster of a storm develop down in this region and then move slowly northeastward up the coast.
And it looks like a biggie. We'll have all the nasty details shortly.
But no flakes in sight, and you folks thought we had blown another call. Many thought this storm was heading out to sea and maybe giving us a clean miss. But by late Monday morning, bad news. The snowfall began, and it didn't really stop until Wednesday. Boston and southern New England would soon be trapped in snow. 27 inches of snow in Boston, up to 40 inches in Rhode Island. Hurricane-force winds whipped up the highest tides yet recorded in New England in this century. Seawalls, Houses, buildings, and roads were smashed by the blizzard of '78. Transportation inside and outside Boston came to a full stop for nearly a week.
There is no traffic because there are no roads.
Tie-ups, abandoned cars, marooned drivers choked every major highway. The Red Cross reported the blizzard stranded or forced more than 26,000 people from their homes. Governor Dukakis declared a state of emergency, informally dressed. Perhaps this was the first major step in the making of a presidential candidate.
The weather situation that now exists in the Commonwealth is one of the worst in our history. And for that reason, I've ordered a state of emergency under Chapter 639 of the Acts of 1950.
Mr. Dukakis estimated blizzard damage would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Snow removal would reach far beyond $100 million. There were at least 26 deaths in the Commonwealth, 55 dead across the New England storm track.
On the way out, I grabbed the baby several times with a small child. I just could not hold on to her. And all 6 of us ended up out in the water, and 2 of us drowned.
Because of the destruction and damage from the blizzard, about 7,000 people had to leave their homes in Massachusetts coastal areas.
I lost my home.
Heat is out, the place is all flooded, and there's going to be an awful lot of work to do when we get back.
If you lost everything you worked for and, you know, you can't salvage anything, you know, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy.
You're just never going to go home again. Nothing is ever going to be the same.
Storm emergency centers were established throughout eastern Massachusetts. It was an epic disaster, but in these battles against the elements, so often it is the people who lift your heart.
The morning after, John Premack and I headed out about 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, we headed east down 128. Didn't know what to expect. I think the experience told you something about the human spirit. The one thing that we did discover is the nobility of the human spirit. Nobody was mad. Nobody ranted or raged. You know, nobody was upset about the thing or cursing the weather, the elements, the gods, what you will. They accepted it. It was quite a remarkable thing. People, of course, were grateful to survive the bloody thing. But what impressed me was that at times like that, the best comes out in people.
It's very lonely in there.
Well, you didn't see the water come out.
Well, I thought that since I was only a few cars back, we might be able to get out by tonight. We have the people in the snowmobiles banging on the doors to get them out.
National Guardsmen and police did fine work in protecting the storm victims, but the security forces could not prevent looting.
The major part of the inventory is gone. Most of it is gone. Just dribs and drabs are left.
How many times were you hit?
With this, in the last day or two?
Yeah.
3 times, 3 onslaughts. Every time we boarded up, they ripped apart and went in again. All day yesterday, 3 times yesterday.
This certainly was the most costly hibernation New England has ever experienced. But for a time, the age of the automobile was suspended. Downtown became a pedestrian mall, and neighborhoods came to life again. You know, the blizzard of '78 occurred during a new moon, so astronomically already the tides were way above normal. You couple that with hurricane-force winds, and you have devastation along the coast. We'll be back with more New England storms of the century.
If you sing like an angel, but do it without love, you'll never rise above the crowd. If you chase after goals but forget your heart, you'll always be answering to someone else. If you follow the same path without trying another, you'll just be left wondering. If you drive a sports car but do it without passion, you're not driving an Integra from Acura.
talks to 50,000 people a day. We've learned that you need a PC that lets you be who you want to be. Call, click, or come in. Get a Gateway Essential PC with an Intel Celeron processor, and we'll give you a year on the internet.
Considering how well it handles the elements under the road, it's no surprise that our newest 4x4 performs so well on the road. Introducing the all-new Jeep Grand Cherokee, now with an exclusive quadricoil suspension and advanced steering system for a more agile, responsive ride on any surface. The all-new Jeep Grand Cherokee, the most capable sport utility ever. Check out the award-winning Grand Cherokee Limited at your dealer.
From a perch between the stars in the unending night of outer space, the view of planet Earth is magnificent. It is estimated there are more than 2,000 thunderstorms in some stage of development at any single moment. At ground level, the clouds are dark and threatening, growling with thunder, marked by brilliant cracklings, electric discharges traveling 50,000 miles a second. And this lightning strikes down somewhere on the planet 100 times at any given second. Not much has happened in the lightning game since the Mozart of kite flying, Ben Franklin, went the distance with a few of the local bolts. Science knows lightning, an electrical discharge that may take place between one part of a cloud and another part, between one cloud and another, or between a cloud and the Earth. But how do you control it? And how do you capture all the electrical energy for useful purposes? Several 100 million volts in a few strokes. Maybe we'll have that answer by the next century. New England has an unpredictable climate, and there is plenty of climate dripping on us when those thunderstorms come rolling across the Northeast. The rainstorms in these parts are legendary.
Just last June 1998, we had, of course, 17 inches of rain here at Blue Hill, which is the second wettest month on record. In 1 hour, we had over 3 inches in a thunderstorm, all part of that unusually rainy month of June 1998.
Have you ever heard of a once-in-a-100-year rainstorm? Well, every once in a while we get one of those around here. Rainfalls can exceed a half a foot in 24 hours.
The disastrous rainfall in November 1927 brought a flood tide of epic proportions. Rain measured more than 9 inches in some areas of Vermont, easily the hardest hit of all the New England states.
Well, this was an extraordinary rainfall. Something like 90% of the state received more than 5 inches of rain inside of 30 hours. That rain came down on saturated ground.
85 people died in the floods, 84 in Vermont, and 1 person in Rhode Island. There was no time for preparation, no time for escape.
Well, Hollister Jackson, who was lieutenant governor at the time, drove up Tremont Street, parked his car when he saw he could go no further. I guess he was somewhat in the water from Potash Brook. Got out of his car, took a few steps, and disappeared. And they weren't able to find his body until, I think, about a week later.
The problem was that you couldn't forecast these events as well as you might have liked. The technology was lacking.
Memories remain of that 4th of November, when the rain fell more than 8.5 inches in 1 day. Observers of the flood believed several factors were at work in the tragedy, most notably the old practice of local communities building dams without the supervision of capable engineers, dams and bridges that would not hold back the floodwaters. Vermont alone estimated the Great November Storm of 1927 created more than $28 million in damages.
This is easily the greatest flood in the history of Vermont.
The floodplain of western Massachusetts was home to manufacturing companies, factories built near the source of their water power, and nearby were the homes of factory workers. The deluge of '36, a combination of heavy rains and snowmelt, swept down the Connecticut Valley, and much was lost. Hartford looked more like Venice. Floodwaters crested nearly 40 feet above normal levels. Since 1949, the major rainfall in Boston was produced by Hurricane Diane.
After floods caused by Hurricane Diane ravaged New England and the Middle Atlantic states in August.
Nearly 12 inches of rain fell on August 18, 1955. But in 1996, a no-name gale whipped in and overwhelmed the storm drains in the city. That caused a neighborhood crisis.
How you going to survive? You got no heat, you got no telephone, you got nothing.
When the rain began 11 days ago, this part of Roslindale was swamped. A water main intended to carry 190,000 gallons a day couldn't handle 250,000, and the excess sewage and water went into yards and homes.
The biggest challenge in the period that I've been here was the flooding in October of 1996. People weren't prepared for it psychologically, and I don't think we were prepared for the difficulties that it would visit on the neighborhoods.
We have playground equipment in our yard that is washing around.
The Zant family on Sagamore Street in Revere has knee-deep water in their backyard. They haven't seen anything like this since, well, you know.
1978, really. That's... No other time has the water washed across the street the way it has, flooded the yards like this.
Nearly 8 inches of rain had fallen in a day.
People don't go to the bathroom more in a storm. They probably go to the bathroom less. But what's in the sewers can all of a sudden get mingled with everything coming in from an overwhelmed drainage system, and then we're in trouble. Because the sewer systems back up, what comes out of the manhole is not attractive to look at or to be around. It's not healthy, it's not pleasant. People are disgusted and unhappy. One of the problems is that we have development all through our area, and of course in a natural environment, a lot of water just runs into the ground or it runs into a pond. We've now paved over that pond. Nothing soaks up there. Everything runs right off, and so even drains that are theoretically big enough aren't big enough when you've paved everything. So we've altered the natural environment.
Boston is windier than Chicago, and believe it, not even rainy Seattle matches Boston in annual rainfall.
Not only are we more windy than Chicago, we actually get more rainfall in the annual year than Seattle, which is called, the rain city. We typically get about 42 to 44 inches of rainfall a year compared to Seattle, which is probably in the low 30s.
Flooding can paralyze a city, so why not redesign the system? Make the drains big enough to handle the great storms as well as the average blow.
Well, if you talk to people who are into the drainage business, you can never build a drain that's bigger than the biggest storm you can imagine. If you have a big storm, it'll overwhelm an adequate drainage system.
2 of the top 10 storm events in Boston over the last 50 years took place in 1998, 4 months apart. In June, we were drenched with nearly 7 inches of rain over 2 days.
A lot of times in the spring, we'll get a good-sized big puddle back there, but this is the worst it's been. We've been here for 13 years.
In October, nearly 6 inches of rain over 3 days.
This is ridiculous.
The kind of damage that I see is an entire senior center where everyone needs to be evacuated because the entire building is now an electrical hazard due to flooding in the basement.
Uncomfortable and irritating, but a scouring rain washes the sky clean and New England begins again.
It's about vision. It's about that part of imagination which lives outside the lines. It's about focus and the engineering freedom to change everything that was or question everything that is. It's insight and the flow of original thinking that can revitalize an industry or rewrite its rules. It's foresight and the discerning intelligence to negotiate surprise and navigate new ground. It's thousands of people visualizing change and one company's way of looking at tomorrow.
You never told Mom I was the one who broke her necklace.
and I covered for you plenty. To this day, no one knows where you really went after the spring dance. You're still the one I trust with all my secrets. Have coffee with me.
The Premium Cup Collection from Maxwell House. 8 extraordinary new coffees, special enough to share every day.
Everything reflects freshness, the colors, the vibrancy of the colors, the shape of the vegetable, the tautness of the vegetable. I like to be inspired by what I see.
The quality is definitely there. There's definitely a sense of confidence at Wild Harvest.
You have to trust the store. In a store like Wild Harvest, there is nothing that is left out. You can find everything and you know it's the best. All the fish looks like it's just coming from the boat. You find practically everything except a mermaid maybe.
We're close. Move out! What happens when a company that specializes in trucks unveils the most powerful SUV in its class? Introducing the new 205 horsepower, go anywhere, Isuzu Amigo.
We gotta stop letting these things out for test drives.
You know, when northern air collides with southern air, that's when a storm happens. How violent that collision is will determine if weather history books will have to be rewritten to make room for another record rainfall or record snowfall. The chaotic pattern of air we live under gives us perfect storms. But being New Englanders, we never can be completely sure we can survive them.
It is a good and clever phrase, the perfect storm, and it fit the killing forces at work that October of 1991. The Andrea Gale, in search of swordfish, or at least a profit of fish, was doomed to founder with all hands lost. The author of Perfect Storm, Sebastian Junger, told Channel 5's Chronicle what was taking place on the Gale's last voyage.
I'd never been face to face in the midst of powers like that. You know, I've been on forest fires, I've been in as a journalist in a couple of wars. Nothing compared to the waves right down the street. I really feel like I was witnessing the works of God right there in front of me. A hurricane came up from the Caribbean and merged with a gale off the Great Lakes. That was why this meteorologist I interviewed who tracked it for the National Weather Service said that it was the perfect storm, meteorologically perfect. You couldn't design a worse storm.
Every perfect storm has an extraordinary capacity for irrational behavior. The no-name storm of 1991 approached. We forecasters were concerned.
The storm has been backing in from the ocean, as you can see in our satellite imagery, moving from east to west.
This storm system is now pushing to the west.
We have an unusually strong storm out in the ocean.
The storm without a name breezed in and lashed the afternoon commute with gales of wind and rain.
The 30 years I've been coming here, I've never seen the water like this. It's incredible. Mountains of water.
Even those at work yielded to wind and wave, like News Center 5's Ron Golleben and photographer Warren Doolin, who got covered while handling storm coverage in Revere's Beachmont section.
10 degrees colder, and this could have been a replay of the blizzard of '78. This coastal storm delivered a fearful blow. Erosion was a major problem.
Waves like these yesterday ripped huge amounts of shoreline away. National seashore officials say Nauset and Coast Guard beaches lost up to 45 feet of oceanfront.
The house was attached to that foundation. It took and flipped in the air. The first floor has disappeared. We haven't found the stove, the sink, the refrigerator, the tub, anything from the first floor. And it flipped around and ended up back in the marsh.
I'm signing the letter right now to ask the president to declare that a disaster exists.
Property losses were in the millions of dollars.
Words can't describe it. Any word synonymous with just complete devastation is the only accurate way that you can't describe it. People are just left with vacant lots, homes are gone, cars are thrown into the river. It's just horrible.
I don't know if I'm going to have a house to go home to at this point. Doesn't look good.
The ocean and the river became one, and the streets just filled up with sand from the ocean. And then there was nothing stopping the waves. The walls then were covered with sand, the protective sea walls, and then the water just washed over the top.
Down here on Hummerock, the barrier beach is accessible only by foot. And it's easy to see why. Behind me, this used to be a road.
But the family and friends waiting for the Andrea Gale were not counting their losses in dollars. They waited, but the Gale never came home.
Somewhere, sometimes I still think they're somewhere, even though I know.
Nor'easters, gales, sou'westers, gusts, all of them can be deadly.
Everything you work for is gone.
I'm amazed at this whole thing. It's just overwhelming, really.
I see every great storm of our century as a perfect storm. Widely scattered factors coming together by chance or grand design depend on precise timing and circumstance to make a violent atmospheric event. If there is one surprising element common to each perfect storm, it is this. We just don't know how severe the storm will be. The unexpected arrival and stupendous force of the 1938 hurricane produced a high death toll. The lack of warning, the power and unpredictability of the Worcester tornado ambushed an unprepared neighborhood. No one expected the ice storm of 1998 to be so destructive. Blizzards, floods, thunderstorms. All of them can surprise us with unexpected intensity. But meteorologists now have a better sense of how weather works. And better weather tools mean more reliable forecasts. And of course, fewer surprises.
Well, the forecast for 1999 is in, and it calls for more storms than average. Actually, 14 named tropical storms or hurricanes will form in the Atlantic. But weather forecasting is more accurate and faster than any time in history. And over the past 25 years, weathermen have also learned that their top priority is to inform the public and get everyone out of harm's way. New England weather breeds New Englanders. We don't live in fear of the great storms, we respect them. Perhaps storms put us a little more in touch with our own mortality. Oh yes, don't forget to join me for the New England storms of the next century. Good night. I'm Dick Albert.
He loves me. He loves me not. He loves me. He loves me not. Oh.
The word at all. Train them up in the word so that the only thing they'll know to do is the word. And they won't depart from it. Not to train them up to go back. But if they do go away or go astray, then you still have to do your part, making sure and trust in the fact that I've done my part as a parent and they'll come back if that's your case. Amen?
There's an explosion taking place in the spirit realm.
Creflo Dollar hosts the 1999 World Changers Church International Finance Convention, March 22nd through the 26th. Experience financial breakthrough for 5 explosive days with Creflo Dollar.
You think getting a house in cash is too hard for God? Honey, if he saved you, if he sanctified you, if he filled you with the Holy Ghost, hey, is there anything too hard for God?
John Avanzini, Marcus Bishop, and Leroy Thompson. Meetings will be held at World Changers Church International, 2500 Burdett Road in College Park, Georgia, March 22nd through the 26th. Mark your calendars now.
Hello, I'm Creflo Dollar, and welcome to Changing Your World broadcast. Today we're going to join Taffy as she teaches us how to impart faith into our children. Now I tell you, that is a very, very, for some people, challenging task. But it doesn't have to be a challenging task if we'll do it God's way. You know, God said about Abraham, he says, I chose you because I knew you would teach it to your children. And it's time for us to learn as parents how to impart our faith into our children. Don't let the television do all the imparting. You know, don't let the rock and roll singers do all the imparting. Don't let the bully down the street do the imparting. You as parents, take hold of the Word of God and impart faith into your children now while they're young. It's time to do it now. And when they're old, they won't depart from it because they got it the right way and they got it from the parents. Let's go right into today's broadcast and join Taffy as she teaches us on how to impart faith into the life of our children.
Convict them with the word, but you allow the word to be sown in their heart, and then you trust the Holy Spirit to convict them. Don't try to play the role of the Holy Ghost by convicting them, but you just trust in God, and God's faithful to do his part. Only thing he asks us to do is sow the word in, and he'll do the rest. He'll do what the Holy Spirit needs to do in terms of convicting them. If they want to go to parties, if they want to act like a fool, if they want to stay out all night, if they want to do